Hey guys, welcome to Ask GT. We've seen Burjo and Luffy and a few of the other boys do these, so now it's my turn. This first one is all the questions to do with regarding racing, so thanks for sending your questions in, but let's just fire straight into it. First question's from Brock. Obviously the new cars are quite different style to drive. Have I found the level of drivers in the current main game to be higher than what it was sort of 10-15 years ago when I first came in? And answer to that is yes, the level of the drivers has come up considerably. The cars now are very particular to drive. We see that every year when endurance drivers come over from Europe and America, come in and do the long distance races with us, that they find it quite difficult to pick up how to drive our cars. They require a very unique driving style, and all of the Aussie-based guys that race in the series full-time are operating at such a high level, getting the most out of the cars, that that's really come up, especially in the last 5 years, I think. So. Yeah, when I first started, the level was probably still pro, semi-pro, whereas now it's full-on professional, world's best practice type driving. Question from Shane: what are the chances of your wife driving with you in the Enduros in the future? Would love to see it. Probably not great, because in the interest of marital bliss going forward, it's probably best that we don't team up racing-wise, because if one of us does something to harm the performance of the car throughout the course of the weekend, then all we're going to do is argue about that at the track, and then we'll argue about it again at home. So certainly not in a V8 supercar, but maybe in the future look at something maybe in the 12-hour or GT style racing or production car style racing. But Leanne's pretty busy with her own racing, looking after the kids. I'm obviously really busy with the HRT stuff, so not in the near future, but never say never. Is there going to be a chance that Scaife will ever race again? If so, would you put him in with myself or JC? Yeah, I don't think so. I think Mark now has spent too many years out of the car, obviously very busy with his Channel 7 and media commitments, and obviously busy outside of the car. So I don't think you'll see Scaife racing again full-time, certainly not here. So it was great. It was great that I had the opportunity to be his teammate for a full-time in 2008, and we shared car together at Bathurst in 2006 and 2008. Certainly I learned a lot from Mark, but I think his future's in the commentary box, not so much behind the steering wheel. Damo asks, what's the biggest adjustment you have made to your driving style since Car of the Future? There's been a few small changes. These cars now are much more sensitive on the brake, so the way that the car moves under brakes and pitches under brakes is what we call it, is different to what the old car was, and the big difference is because the fuel tank has moved from behind the rear tyre to in front of the rear tyre, just under where the rear passenger seats would be, and that inertia is very, very different because such a big amount of weight or mass has changed in the weight distribution of the car. So the cars are very different on the way into the corner. They're actually quite similar leaving the corner, so you had to change the way that you use the brake pedal, the way that you actually stop the car and get the car to pitch. So for me, I used to make up a lot of my time on the brakes with the old style car. I used to be probably one of the latest brakers in the category, whereas now it's more about carrying corner speed, carrying momentum through the corner. So that's one of the big changes I've had to make. Luke asks, holding off Lounsey in the 2011 Bathurst, how did I do it? Well, basically I was just not look in the mirror too much. I knew from earlier in the race where his strengths were and where my strengths were, and I just made sure I played to my strengths and didn't make any mistakes where his strengths were. So I didn't look in the mirror too much, didn't focus on what he was up to too much, just made sure I hit my marks, got the car to do what I wanted to do. We were struggling at the end of that race, didn't quite have the speed that we needed, but it was a great feeling when we crossed the line that day, that's for sure. John asks, how accurate is the fuel remaining data that the engineers use? Well, if Bathurst taught us anything, the engineers know a lot more about the drivers than the drivers about how much fuel's left in the car. They're very, very accurate as far as knowing how much is left in the tank. We obviously get a readout on the dash display every lap about our fuel use, how much fuel we're using each lap. We have a target number that we have to hit, and then we get a plus or minus whether we did a good job hitting our fuel number or a bad job hitting our fuel number, and they're very, very accurate. So I know I've brought a car back with about 700 mils of fuel left in the tank, and the guys basically said, we reckon we've got about a litre left, so they're only 300 mil out. So very, very accurate. A lot of work goes into making sure that we understand the fuel numbers. A lot of our races these days are all about fuel, as we saw at Bathurst. and making sure we listen to what those boys are telling us to do, as well as keeping the speed up, is one of the real skills that we have to have as drivers. Lee asks, how was the change in grip levels at Bathurst? The track didn't hold up to it well, and a few cars with some serious damage. So yeah, obviously one of the big talking points throughout the course of the Bathurst weekend, the lead up, was the new surface, how much grip it had, and it did add a huge amount more grip. We saw lap times that were around 2 to 2.5 seconds a lap faster than what we were there previously. But then obviously in the race didn't hold up, and it wasn't actually the surface itself, it was a patch that they put in to turn 2 before we even got there. There was obviously some sort of imperfection in the original laying of the new surface that they decided they needed to patch some of the track, and it was actually that patch that came up, and we saw guys just having to be the smallest amount offline that would send them wide onto the marbles, and then once you're on the marbles, when the track's breaking up like that, there's no grip and straight into the outside wall. So ultimately, whilst it was a bit unique, we saw that red flag that they fixed the track. Ultimately, it proved to be the right decision, because at least from that point on, going forward to the end of the race, we saw a pretty good race, and obviously pretty exciting race towards the end of the day. Joshua asks, how many times in one lap of Mount Panorama would you adjust the front and or rear anti-roll bar and or the brake bias? And ideally you wouldn't be adjusting it any time throughout the lap, but a lot of the time, especially in qualifying, we will adjust the front roll bar or rear roll bar depending on the car balance, but definitely throughout the course of the lap we'll adjust the brake bias. Obviously at Bathurst there's a couple of really big stops down the bottom of the track at the end of Conrod Straight into the Chase, into the last corner, into the first corner, into Mountain Straight. That's all heavy, very, very heavy braking, big stops. But then all across the top, it's all about momentum and flow. So you tend to actually lock a front in those sort of smaller stops, like into the cutting, into the dipper, down into Forest Elbow. So we'll run a little bit more rear bias across the top of the mountain, and then we come back on the Conrod, put a bit of front bias into it to make sure that the car will stop nicely at the end of Mountain Straight. So yeah, adjusting the brake bias throughout qualifying quite a bit. Throughout the course of a fuel stint, we'll probably adjust the anti-roll bars 3 or 4 times, but ideally you don't want to be adjusting the roll bars every lap, because that makes for a very busy 161 laps. If you could, Kobe asks, if you could change the outcome of one race from your past, which one and why? Well, very, very recent one to be Bathurst. If I could change the outcome, it would be actually being part of the race. Yeah, look, obviously disappointing. First time that I've ever had to sit out a race. I've gone to a race weekend in full anticipation and preparation for racing and not actually being able to take part in the race. So obviously disappointing for the entire team, for the guys on the crew, for all our partners, and all our, as far as sponsors and all of our fans. But the decision was the right decision to make. Since we've had the car back here at the workshop, we found a lot more damage on the car that we didn't see at the track. So fixing the car certainly wasn't going to be an option. So disappointing. But if we had a time machine, hopefully we could have turned back time and fixed it, but certainly not the case. Phil, last question. Phil, what do you consider has been the best on-track battle fight you've had, and who was involved with it, and what made it great for me? Well, we've spoke a little bit about it, but it was probably 2011 with Craig Lowndes at the end of Bathurst. What made it great was that we came out on top, and it was Bathurst. And you know, Craig and I battled fairly hard. It was only 3 laps, but we didn't change paint, we didn't run into each other. But it was absolute on the limit at the end of the biggest race in Australia, and to come out on top for me personally was fantastic. So that was certainly a real highlight for me in my career, and hopefully there's more of those to come in the future. So thanks very much for your questions, guys. Really enjoy this sort of interaction with you guys. We really love some of the stuff that you come up with. It's a lot of fun. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon.